Hey guys, it's Memorizer92. Hope you guys enjoyed the videos on Destroyer. And today I'm going to make a guide for another class that isn't released in NA and EU, the Lancemaster. For this video, I'm going to cover the playstyle, stat, and roughly about the engravings, the class engravings. And I will definitely cover profound guide of skill set, engraving, gem, card, and gear in the next videos. If you see the skill set here, you can see some blue skills and red skills as well. The blue skills are the skills that swings the spear, and red skills are the skills that pokes with the spear. And Lancemaster has two stances. The swinging stance right here, where you can only use the blue skills, and if you press Z key, then you can switch over to another lance called poking stance, where you can only use the red skills. So basically, Lancemaster has two stances, the poking stance and swinging stance. If you see below here, you can see a gauge in a shape of a smiley face, right? And it's divided in three. This is called identity gauge for Lancemaster. Whenever you use either blue skills or red skills, it charges the gauge. And when you switch over, when you have 1/3 of the gauge, then you will get a specific buff by level 1. If you get 2/3, you will get the buff of level 2, and if you max out the gauge and switch over, then you will get the max level, the level 3 buff. So you wanna know exactly what the buff do, right? Well, there are two kinds of buff. First one, you can get the buff by switching over from blue skill to red skill. And the other one, you can get it by switching from red skill to blue skill. And both of these buffs are slightly different from each other. The buff you get by switching over from blue skill to red skill is, let me show you. Here you get 15% increase of movement speed, 10% of damage, and 25% of crit damage increase for 10 seconds. And I told you that you can fill up the gauge by using the skills, right? And on the max gauge, if you switch it back to the blue skill, then you will get a different buff here. You will get attack speed by 10% and 10% of damage increase and crit rate by 15% for 20 seconds. So these buffs are totally different, and the figures that I've told you, either from changing from blue to red or red to blue, is based on the max gauge efficiency. So you're getting the playstyle, right? Since the duration time of the buff is short, like it's like 10 or 20 seconds, right? So whenever you max out the gauge, you have to transfer immediately, even though you might have some skills that are not used. So if I try to switch over from red skill to blue skill, then you have to use the skills that are the strongest among these blue skills. And then if it's on max gauge, you have to switch over right away and use the red skills, which are the strongest, and then switch it back to the blue skills and use the other skills to fill up the gauge again and switch over to the red skills. So this is the DPS cycle, and you might notice that Lancemaster is not a type of class that you can take a break of. You know what I'm saying, right? So it requires you to be busy, and if you're the one who likes this kind of busy play style, then I definitely recommend you to play Lancemaster. Well then, let me go over to the two class engravings before I go to the stats. Right here. If you see here, the first one is called Climax, and the second one is called Moderation. So you can tell just by seeing the words that both of these engravings are totally different. Climax increases the figure of the identity buff that you get when you switch over. I will go over the exact figure on next video, but if I tell you briefly, at engraving level 3, it increases your buff at least 1.5 times more for both of those stance buffs. And for moderation, it's very simple. You can no longer use the red stance, which means you can only use the blue stance and blue skills. But in exchange of that, it increases the damage of all those blue skills by 36% at level 3 engraving. So it's like the handgunner engraving from the Deadeye. I bet most of you guys are curious which one is better than which, right? To be honest, Climax is slightly stronger than the moderation when it comes to DPS. So it's okay to go for moderation as well if you think it's fun, because there's not much, huge difference between these two engravings for the DPS. For the stats, there are two kinds of stat setting for Climax Lance Masters and one for moderation. The first stat for Climax is maxing specialization and having swiftness as substat. Well, there's one very important and insane thing that you guys must know about this. There are six red skills, right? And four skills out of six skills have tripod that guarantees crit. Like, I'm not even joking. It really guarantees crit. Like 100% it crits whenever you use the skills. Four red skills out of six have that tripod. So because of that, Lance Master doesn't need to go for crit stat. It literally, you can just invest zero of it. Having guaranteed crit skills with zero invest to the crit stat is kind of crazy, right? Especially when you compare with other classes. And if you see here, the specialization, uh, this one increases the DPS of Lance Master by a lot. There are some classes that are sensitive to specialization, and Lance Master is one of them because it increases the efficiency of the identity buff by insane figure. If you see here, I have 1,700 specialization, and at this figure, it increases like over 100% of efficiency of the identity buff, which is really high. Well, I told you that some skills, some red skills have guarantee crit tripod, right? Which means the blue skills, which I didn't mention, blue skills doesn't have that kind of crit guarantee crit tripod. So you might doubt that if you go for a zero crit, well, you might be okay when you are on the red stance. But what if you switch over to the blue stance? Because these skills doesn't have guarantee crit tripod, and with zero invest to the crit rate means it will literally have no crits whenever you use blue skills, right? Well, you don't have to worry about that. Do you remember that when you switch over to blue buff from, I mean, sorry, switch over to blue skills from red skills, you get one of the buff you get is 15% of crit chance, right? And that 15% of crit chance, it increases when you go with climax engraving, and also if you have high specialization. The base is 15% increase in crit rate, right? But for me, pairing up all the specialization stuff and this climax engraving, if I switch over on max gauge, here, let me adjust it to max gauge like this. If I switch over from red skill to blue skill, then here's what I want to show you. This is the crit rate. It's currently 1.82%, which is very low. But if I switch it by pressing Z key, it increases to 58%. So it literally increased like 57%. And that's because that's because of the specialization and the climax. Yeah. So instead of 15, it raised 57, which is insane. And with 57, like 58 crit chance, of course you will not have any problem spamming the blue skills. So this is how Lance Master goes. And since it doesn't need a crit, you can spare the substat to the swiftness, which makes your Lancemaster faster. So most of the Climax Lancemasters prefer this build. The second build is investing crit and specialization in proportion of somewhat like 2 to 3 like this. You might ask me that, didn't you say Lancemaster doesn't need a crit stat? Well, that's for the build which uses the guaranteed crit hit, tripod. But of course, there are builds that doesn't need that. Like those red skills that have the guaranteed crit tripod has another tripod in the same line that increases the damage instead of getting guaranteed crit. Like this one here, this one is the one that enables you to have the guaranteed crit, but if you go this one, it increases the damage much more than this one. And most of the skills, red skills that I told you that have the guaranteed crit has this kind of insane damage buff in the same line, which means in exchange of the guarantee crit, you have to go for the damage increase, which means you will lose the guaranteed crit, and therefore you need crit stat to compensate the crit rate. So the theory you can see here is that you go for damage tripod with crit stats and aim for higher damage when it crits. So the advantage of this build is that if it crits, you can literally see higher damage on red skills. But the problem is, since you have no swiftness here, you will become really slow, and the damage is lower than the first build if it doesn't crits. For the moderation engraving, this is the stat distribution that you kind of want to go. Notice that it has zero specialization because specialization increases the efficiency of the identity buff, right? But you get that buff when you switch over. The problem is that you can only stay in the blue stance if you go for moderation. So you literally don't need the specialization, which allows you to invest the stats in crit and swiftness. The proportion really depends on your taste. Or the crit you have. Like if you have the Argos gear that increases your crit rate, then you can invest more on swiftness for circulating the damage cycle faster. If not, you need to invest more on crit. Well, guys, that's all for the first video about Lancemaster. I hope it was enough to, trigger the interest from you guys. And definitely, I'm gonna upload the videos, the second and third videos about the skill set and engravings as well. So please stick with me, subscribe me, then I will see you guys pretty soon. Thanks for watching.